I got involved and consulted with some of the best lawyers to say this cannot be okay, that you can just, at a whim, treat California as a political plaything and say, yeah, we're just going to redraw the maps when we feel like it, just to give ourselves another 6 seats. I'm going to file a lawsuit and I'm going to stop them doing this if they go down this road. Hello everyone, welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. A very, very big show today because we're going to get right into the big issue that is top of the agenda for the whole country right now, which is this battle over redistricting. I'm going to be talking about what I'm doing on that, not just talking about it, but the actual action that I'm proposing to take on the California end of that argument. Obviously, the spotlight is on Texas right now, but California threatening to retaliate. And I'm right in the middle of that fight. I'll tell you what I'm planning to do. And then we're going to be discussing that with Shelley, who's got some incredibly interesting and important information on redistricting that you need to hear, but also on some amazing things that are going on all the time in California. We see these sneaky efforts to make life more expensive, raising taxes. In this case, yet again, another proposal to raise the minimum wage to $30. What is that about? We're going to find out. New sneaky property taxes being planned across the state of California. We're going to get into all of that and more with Shelley. So let's get into this big story on redistricting. It is dominating the headlines, and there is so much misinformation and bad faith arguments about it. Of course, California has an incredibly important role to play because Gavin Newsom has said that if Texas goes ahead with its plan to redraw its maps for electoral districts, then he, supported by his Attorney General, Rob Bonta, will retaliate tit for tat and so on. So this is a very live issue, and I'm right in the middle of it. In fact, today, as I'm taping this, I will be in Sacramento at a press conference laying out my legal strategy, my plan to fight back if Gavin Newsom goes ahead with his scheme. But let's start at the beginning of all this, because one story that you hear the whole time as this is unfolding is Texas started it. You hear that the whole time. So when Democrats say, well, we don't like redistricting and gerrymandering, we don't want to do anything like this, we want democracy and we want but Texas started it. So we got to fight fire with fire, and it's Texas's fault because they started it. What a load of total BS. Texas did not start it. If we're talking about gerrymandering and drawing electoral district maps in order to favor your party over the other party, and it's specifically when we talk about the House of Representatives in that context, you know who really started it? California. In 2008, the voters passed an initiative to take the power to draw the state legislative districts out of the hands of the state legislature, where it had been and where it still is in Texas. That's why this is all going on in the Texas legislature, and you've got the legislators, the Democrats running out of Texas, so there isn't a quorum, so that the Texas legislature can't vote on this, and so it's all happening in the legislature. Well, in 2008 in California, the voters said, we don't want that to happen anymore. The legislators have an interest in this because they're affected directly by it, whether they are currently state legislators, and you're talking about redrawing legislative districts for the state at the state level, or if you're talking about House districts at the federal level, many state legislators, of course, then want to run for the House. So they've got an interest. So they shouldn't be drawing maps that affect them. That was the idea behind a ballot initiative in 2008 in California, supported by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take the power away from the legislature, put it in the hands of an independent redistricting commission that would have nothing to do with the legislature, would have clearly set rules for trying to draw the districts in an impartial manner that was fair to all sides. That was the idea. That's what voters approved. And then 2 years later, in 2010, a parallel initiative was passed by the voters, applying the same logic to congressional districts. And of course, that's what we're talking about now. So 15 years since the voters decided this. Well, guess what happened? That so-called independent redistricting commission was completely hijacked by the Democrats. And if you want to know the details of that, then I could refer you to a conversation we had here on this show with someone called Kathy Abernathy, who was part of the process and was there when it happened. And she laid out in very clear detail exactly what happened and how the process that was supposed to be independent was totally hijacked by the Democrats. They changed the criteria for drawing up districts. They put their cronies and political activists as the staff members who were drawing up the map. They completely ran away with the process and gerrymandered the districts in California, the so-called independent commission. And the test of that, the way you know that they gerrymandered it, you just have to look at the political composition. So you've heard me say this many times. In California, the Republican vote in statewide, as measured in statewide elections, so the votes of Republicans across the state, if you add them all up, it's been very consistent for the last 20 years. It's been very close to 40%, either up or down from that number. 40% of California votes Republican. So you would think if we had a fair districting process that roughly 40% of the seats would be in Republican hands. Not exactly. The process isn't supposed to be precise. You know what the number actually is today? For 40% of the votes, in terms of the House of Representatives, in California, Republicans have 17% of the seats, less than half what fair representation would look like. So that's the starting point. And you know what that means in terms of seats? You've got all this argument about the balance of power in the House and, 5 seats from Texas and so on. If we had roughly proportional representation in California, if we had fair representation, if we had fair districting, genuinely independent, nonpartisan districting in California, the Republicans would have another 12 House seats. 12. That would be a total game changer when it comes to national politics. So when you hear all these arguments about Texas taking 5 seats for Republicans and how outrageous this is, the Democrats have already taken, stolen, whatever language you want to use, they've already taken 12 House seats from Republicans in California. They've stolen those Republican seats. They've silenced the voices of non-Democrat voters in California. So that's the starting point for all this. The Democrats did this first. So all their lectures and their sanctimonious nonsense about how they're the protectors of democracy and how they'd really love things to be independent, BS. Total BS. Now let's get to the specifics. I'm not responsible, let me make that clear, for anything that happens in Texas. They are a different state. I'm talking specifically about California, because here's what Gavin Newsom and his sidekick, Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, have said that they would do if Texas goes ahead with its plan. They would retaliate, and actually they started off saying they were going to take another 5 House seats by redrawing the maps in California. Now they're saying 6. You may ask, well, how can they do that if California has an independent redistricting commission? How can they? And because the Gavin Newsom plan is to give the power back to the legislature to draw these districts. Well, how can they do that? Here's how. This is their plan. The Independent Redistricting Commission in California was established after that ballot initiative I told you about, and it's now in the California State Constitution, Article 21. And it's very clear. It does give the power to draw the districts to this Independent Citizens Districting Commission, they call it. It's also very clear that this should happen once every 10 years. And the first line of that article, it says why. Not just randomly choosing 10 years as a number, but because it's connected to the federal census. Following the federal census, every 10 years, the districts will be redrawn. The districts are supposed to reflect population and roughly approximate where people live. And that's in the Constitution of California. So what Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta are proposing is to hold a special election to amend the Constitution to temporarily take power to draw the districts away from the Districting Commission and give it to the legislature so that they can steal these 6 seats now, and then they're going to return the power after the next census in 2030. That's their plan. And they can do that because in California, to change the Constitution, you need a ballot initiative. The voters have to approve that. That means you have to get something on the ballot. Well, they can do that through the legislature. There are 2 ways you can get something on the ballot in California. You can have a petition-based process where millions of people sign petitions and then that gets it on the ballot if you have the right number, or the legislature can do it directly. The legislature can do it directly if they have a 2/3 majority. They do have a 2/3 majority. Why? Because they've gerrymandered the districts. The same unfairness that applies to the House districts applies to the state legislative districts. So they've got this illegitimate, unfair, unrepresentative 2/3 majority in the state legislature, so they can put this on the ballot. And that's their plan, to put it on the ballot for November, when other elections take place this year. That they've said that's the plan. And then when they put it on the ballot, they need only a 50% majority, or just over, just has to pass by a simple majority. So they can do this. There really isn't anything stopping them, until I got involved and looked at the law and consulted with some of the best lawyers to say this cannot be okay, that you can just, at a whim, and with this arrogance, just treat California as a political plaything and say, yeah, we're just going to redraw the maps when we feel like it, just to give ourselves another 6 seats, taking away the power from this districting commission that the voters approved in the ballot initiative. And here's the legal argument. And this is what I'm going to be laying out today. And this is how I'm going to stop them from doing this. I'm going to file a lawsuit and I'm going to stop them doing this if they go down this road. Because there's a reason for all of this, in terms of the 10-year rule about when you do districting and connecting it to the census. And the reason is deeper than the specific reference to 10 years and the census in the state constitution. It's about equal protection, both in the US Constitution and in the California Constitution. You have an equal protection clause, and it protects people's rights, including the right to vote, including the right to one person, one vote. And that is defined in the Constitution, in both the federal and the state constitution, in the following way: that electoral districts should be roughly equal in population. That's why the districting is connected to the census, to make sure that the districts roughly have the same population in them, so that everybody's vote is weighted equally. One person, one vote. That's in the Constitution, federal and state. So it's a very simple question. If you don't do a census, how do you know where people live or how many people live in which districts? How can you possibly meet the test of equal protection in the Constitution if you don't have a census? There's no answer to that. And so my argument is, fine, this is the political argument. You can go ahead and have your redistricting, California, knock yourselves out. But you've got to have a census first, so that you actually know where people live. And remember, since the last time the districts have been drawn, millions of people have left California, driven out by the crime and the chaos and the homelessness and the taxes and the highest housing costs in the country. We've seen this mass exodus from California. We've seen in the fires entire communities burned to the ground. So where are all those people now? Who knows which districts they're in or where they've moved, whether that's out of state or out of cities into other parts of the state. Nobody knows that. How can they possibly draw fair districts without a census? That is common sense. But it's not just common sense, it's the law. It's the Constitution, equal protection. So that is what I will be doing today, letting everyone know, especially Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta, that if they go ahead with their illegal and unconstitutional scheme, then I will file a lawsuit, both a federal lawsuit, because their scheme violates the US Constitution, and a state court lawsuit because it violates the state constitution, because it violates the principle of one person, one vote, and equal protection under the law. So one way or another, we're going to stop this. The Gavin Newsom scheme to steal 6 Republican seats, it's dead on arrival. All right, Susan Shelley is with us today. Susan, we got a lot to get into today. Your reaction to what I've been talking about in terms of redistricting. You've got some thoughts on that. I know you've been working the issue very hard as well. There's some interesting moves led by, particularly by the unions in Los Angeles, relating to the minimum wage, again, never goes away, and the Olympics, and also yet another attempt to force through unconstitutional tax increases, this time in Santa Cruz. But let's start with the redistricting. So my argument there was that apart from this being, offensive to common sense, the idea that you're going to draw maps halfway through the constitutionally mandated cycle, which also mandates that you have a census, it offends common sense. How can you draw the maps when you don't know where the people live? We've had millions of people leave California. We've had whole communities burned down. What are you basing these maps on? It's entirely political. That just is common sense. But also, more than that, it's the law, because the Equal Protection Clause in the federal and state constitutions is very clear. One person, one vote. And when that comes to electoral districts, they should be roughly of the same population. How can you possibly tell that if you don't have a census? Hence, our legal threat to file a lawsuit on equal protection grounds, both federal and state constitution, if Gavin Newsom goes ahead. What are your thoughts on all of this? You've looked at it from some other angles as well.
Well, one thing I really don't understand is why they think voters would go for this. It has to go on the ballot. It has to be a constitutional amendment approved by the voters. It would be a special election. So you're bothering people in November when it's not even an election year, and you're going to tell them, "We are the politicians. We're going to draw the maps, and your citizen redistricting commission, we love it, but you can't have it for the next 3 cycles. And we're going to draw the maps for you because Trump." And I just don't understand why they think the voters would go for that. They have a terrible reputation. Over and over again in California, the voters have said, "We hate our incumbents." And I know that seems counterintuitive because they reelect them. But if you look at the fact that the voters passed term limits and the voters passed the top 2 primary to get rid of political party influence in picking their nominees for the general election, and the voters approved citizen redistricting in 2 separate elections, one for the state, one for Congress, they don't like these politicians in the back room. And there was also a transparency measure because in Sacramento, they were rushing legislation through with no visibility or no time for the public to even read it. And so there was a transparency initiative which went on the ballot and passed in order to require 72 hours, such a revolutionary idea, 72 hours for people to see what they're doing before they can vote on it. Over and over again, you see that voters are not trusting these politicians. So how are they going to come to the voters in November and say, "Trust us, we must answer what Texas is doing because Texas is going to elect more Republicans." Oh my, and we can't have that. We have to elect more Democrats to offset them. Really, this just seems like such an internal bubble for the Democrats. It's all about incumbency and politicians. Do real voters think like that? I don't think they do.
Well, it's interesting because from what we're hearing, is that they have done polling now that suggests that they are going to win this. And that's why they're going ahead with it, or threatening. But they are already going ahead because they're making plans. They've laid out the plans to members of the legislature. This is not some theory. This is their actual intention, and they've done polling. However, the polling is kind of static. It reflects the situation now. It doesn't capture what you might see in the campaign on this. And we're already hearing that it's going to be a very well-funded campaign on the other side. And you're going to have a very high-profile figure weighing in who's actually no fan of President Trump, but is very, very focused on this issue. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he was the one that was the governor when all these reforms were put in place. Anti-gerrymandering is one of his main causes that he cares about. Now, whatever you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, just the fact is that since he left office, there's basically only 2 things he's gone on about, and he's spent his time and money on. And one of them is climate change. So whatever you think of that, we know that's his strongly held view. The other is gerrymandering. And he's taken the gerrymandering, the Citizens Districting Commission, and all of that on the road, and he's been campaigning for it around the country for years. He really cares about this. So he's said, he's put out a statement saying, I'm against this, and I will campaign against this. So I don't think whatever polling they've done captures any of that.
I think you're right. And there are many states that are doing this. There are 13 states, I think, according to Ballotpedia, that are considering or definitely doing some kind of redistricting mid-decade. 3 of them under court order of one kind or another. There are always legal challenges to the maps that are drawn. over the Voting Rights Act or something else, and then courts get involved, and so maps can be temporarily allowed for an election, but they won't be allowed for the next election. So there's several states, I think Louisiana, Georgia, and Ohio are dealing with that. They're all Republican-led, so they'll be drawing new maps most likely, and then you have, I think, 9 states that are considering drawing new maps. New York is one of them. Some of them have commissions. New York has a commission, but there are elected officials on it. I think Texas is the only state that has started so far. Texas has, I believe, March primary. So they have a filing period that closes in December, opens in November, closes in December. They have to get their maps. So that's why they're doing this now. And they got a letter from Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, saying that after a court decision last November, which changed the interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, some of their districts are illegal. So she said
In
that
Texas.
in Texas, so they have to redraw.
It's a very important part of the argument that hasn't really been widely heard.
It's quite complicated. The Voting Rights Act litigation is quite complicated.
Because the argument, I touched on it just now, which is that the accusation is this is entirely political. Well, why is Texas doing this now? It's purely because Trump asked them to get another 5 seats. Are you saying that actually they needed to do this regardless of whether President Trump asked them to do that?
Well, some people think that Harmeet Dillon's letter was not necessary and that it doesn't have to be interpreted that way. Even the decision last November, which went to the full Fifth Circuit, I think it was 12-6. So there's room for disagreement in the interpretation of whether you can't discriminate on the basis of race or whether you have to discriminate on the basis of race when you're drawing these districts. The idea is that citizens should have the right to choose the candidate who represents them. And some of the jurisprudence on this indicates that racially distinct groups have to have a majority in a particular district so that they can elect the person of their choice, as if race is the only thing that matters to them. That's sort of the premise
By the
of
way,
it.
just on its face, that seems crazy to me.
It goes back to the 1960s. It goes back to the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and then amendments to the Voting Rights Act, and different court decisions. And truthfully, if you go to the text of the Constitution itself, which says you can't do this, the Equal Protection Clause would appear to mean that you can't discriminate on the basis of race this way. But if you want to be historical about it, the Constitution has never really been amended to ban discrimination on the basis of race, not those words. And so it was considered for the 14th Amendment, but it was not adopted. And they left segregation in place. They left bans on interracial marriage where they existed. They left that in place. That was intentional in 1868. It's not intentional anymore, but it's still the case that there's a lot of room for interpretation on whether discrimination on the basis of race is allowed for good purposes or not. And and that's where these things get sticky. So they're drawing these districts, and in the particular decision from last November, it had to do with whether coalition districts were required. A coalition district is when you take for instance, the Hispanic population and the Black population, you add them up together and you say, okay, this is a majority minority district, and they can have a claim under the Voting Rights Act to challenge these maps. Well, what the Fifth Circuit said was not anymore. Coalition districts are not a thing, and you don't have to do that. So Texas was told by Harmeet Dillon that some of their districts that were drawn on racial lines were not legal. And that's when the governor added that to the special session that he had called over flood damage and help for flood victims.
But that is interesting. So just to be really precise about it, what was the initiation point for the Texas redistricting that's going on now? Was it the Harmeet Dillon letter, or was it President Trump asking them for 5 more seats? Do
As
we know?
near as I can pin it down, the letter went out on July 7th, and President Trump's phone call to Texas Republicans where he said 5 seats was on the 15th. So I think it was all happening at the same time in July.
No, but actually, the letter is the initiation point.
It's the legal basis for it. It wasn't just politics, it was also the civil rights
Right,
law.
but I suppose the question of So here's the sequence of events. Let's just make sure this is incredibly informative. So, um, uh, if is this correct? The sequence of events is flood. We need a special session to do flood relief or policy relating to the flood. Special session is called. Harmeet Dillon sends a letter. You got to do something about your districts. Abbott says, okay, I'll add that to the special session, redistricting. A week after that, President Trump says, well, if you're doing redistricting, make sure I get another 5 seats. Is that basically what happened?
I'm not sure if President Trump's call was before redistricting was added to the special session or after, but it all happened in July. And the thing that changed in the law happened last November or December, last November, I think, in the Fifth Circuit. And once they reversed, so they overruled a precedent on how this was interpreted about the coalition districts. And once they did that, it changed whether the Texas maps were lawful or not. That's my understanding.
Would you say that, and I really don't want to end up talking a lot about Texas because you've got some really good points on California, which we haven't got to yet on timing, and I'm very interested in that. But I mean, is it your sense then that actually there is a legitimate because the way it's being covered in the media is it's totally partisan, and the whole thing is just being covered as a purely partisan game, which is why a lot of people are really annoyed, just like turned off by the whole thing. Exactly to your point earlier. Oh my goodness, here we are, politicians. Just it's just pure politics. It's got nothing to do with helping my life at all. So that's why I think a lot of people are turned off by all of this. But is it the case? Do you think that actually there is a legitimate basis for the redistricting in Texas? It is not just a power grab.
Yes, there's a legitimate basis. I suppose you could make an argument of whether they have to do this or they can do this. Harmeet Dillon's letter said you have to do this. Whether they have to do it now or they have to do it in 2030, I'm not really sure. That would be a question for civil rights lawyers, for voting rights specialists. But um, there is politics in it, but there's always politics in redistricting. That's a political action. So in California, people were just sick of it because it was just so brazen and obnoxious and there were a lot of problems with the maps that were drawn. And eventually the voters said enough and there were initiatives to change it and make it a citizens commission with a lot of safeguards to make sure that politicians didn't manipulate it. And I suppose you could argue that they're manipulating it through consultants, but
Well, the
regardless.
argument that I've heard from, and I've referenced this earlier, is from Kathy Abernathy, for one, I did an interview with about this, a while ago, is that and it did end up being manipulated by Democrat operatives who got into the commission and managed to turn it in a Democrat direction, and the Republicans were basically asleep at the wheel and didn't do anything about it, which is why you end up actually, even with the independent commission in California, with a very gerrymandered map, which is why you end up with Republicans for 40% of the votes have 17% of the House seats. Now, we all understand that these districts aren't supposed to be directly proportional in that sense, but they're not supposed to be wildly disproportionate either.
The voters can change their mind at any time. And so it's always a bit on the part of these politicians who say, oh, this is my district and no one can change it. Sometimes the voters surprise them. And this happened in South Texas where Latino voters went for Trump and nobody expected that. So some of these districts that they're drawing that are Latino districts are Republican districts now in Texas because the voters that used to be Democrats are voting Republican. Well, that is democracy, and for all that they're shouting in California that we need to save democracy by stopping Texas, what Texas is doing reflects democracy. So it's a silly self-serving argument by California politicians. It's Governor Newsom trying to look like he's leading the
Yes.
Democrats nationally. But actually, this is just silly. And I think the voters are going to hand him his head in November if they go forward with this. I can't imagine that the voters of California, in a clean election, and that's another topic for another day, but in a clean election, I can't imagine that the voters would go along with a return to backroom map drawing by
Well, it's
by
interesting.
these
No, it's interesting.
partisans.
You make a very strong case, and I hope that's the case. And I'll certainly, if it gets to the point where it's an actual election, I'll be there, right there with Arnold Schwarzenegger, everyone else. A pretty broad coalition against this. I mean, it seems like the only people who are going to be for it are the actual Democrat politicians themselves. But of course, I'm trying to stop it even getting to the ballot on the basis of these legal arguments that I laid out earlier. But you've got some interesting timing arguments as well about why even a delay to the process could be fatal to this scheme of theirs.
Absolutely.
You were talking about filing deadlines and all that. Let's tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the filing period for the June primary, I think it's June 2nd is the Tuesday of the primary election next year. The filing period opens in February, it closes in March. But in December,
Filing to be a candidate, to
the
run in
filing
those,
to be a
yeah.
candidate. So you have to have the district lines so you know where your candidates are, who's filing where, who's eligible for these different. Of course, this is the congressional seats, so you don't have to live in your district. You only have to live in the state for the congressional races. But still, the signature in lieu period where you can collect signatures instead of paying a filing fee opens in December. So they need to
This
have
year.
these maps this year, and they need to have these maps drawn so that the counties can manage the whole process of the primary election. It tick tick the clock, you can't stop it just because you want to stop it for political purposes or because orange man bad or whatever reason. You have a calendar for the June primary, and the signature in lieu period opens, as I said, I believe in December. So if they have a November 4th special election, and in California, we have 7 days to return the ballots after Election Day. They have 30 days to count everything. It takes forever. They finally will certify the vote in early December. I realize that they're drawing the maps in advance so they could be in place right away. But if lawsuits delay the election or delay the certification or delay anything, then these maps will not be in effect for 2026. They'd be in effect for 2028, assuming the voters pass it, which I don't think they will.
And so you could have a situation where they pass it, but they can't implement it till after 2026, which is the whole point, that they
Right,
want to make sure that they control the political point, that they want to take back the House
right.
in 2026 so they can impeach President Trump and all the things that the Democrats want to do.
This is what Newsom said. If we, the Democrats, take back the House, then President Trump's presidency is over in 2026. To me, that's just insurrectionist kind of rhetoric. I don't mean that seriously, but it's just, can't we all get along? And President Trump is the elected president. He has a 4-year term. There's no reason to impeach him, and they want to just go ahead and do what they were doing all through his first term, which is find a way to stop him from being effective through some lawfare or some other method of not letting him govern the country.
I appreciate the way you put that, because to use a less perhaps inflammatory term than the they are, but one of their terms, they're trying to overturn an election. And in
Yes,
fact,
they
they're
are.
trying to overturn two elections. They're
Right.
they're trying to overturn the ballot initiative in California that took the power away from the legislature to draw the districts, and they're trying to overturn the presidential election.
Right. And Texas has every right. The legislature can draw new maps if it wants to. They don't have a constitutional amendment like California does that says every 10 years and it's a citizens commission. They don't need to amend their constitution to do maps the way we would. They can do that. That's democracy too. That's our federalist system. And if the Democrats can't make a good argument to the voters in the midterm elections, then they're going to lose, and they deserve to lose. If they're going to come in and they're going to say what California is saying, well, we want men and women's sports, and we want an open border, and we want unlimited social welfare benefits for people who just came into the country illegally. If that's what they want to run on, good luck to them. I don't think the election would be stolen by Republicans. I think if you throw it away, it's not stealing if someone picks it up.
Well said. All right. Thank you, Susan. And let's keep an eye on those timing points, because it's very interesting. The signatures and lieu point, the fact that that starts in December, presumably ends in March, right? So that you've got those months to get the signatures if you don't want to pay the filing fee. So that's another reason, if you're trying to, if you somehow cut into that, then that would be another ground for some kind of legal action to say, well, I didn't have a fair shot because I couldn't start gathering signatures because I didn't know what the maps were or whatever.
It would push to 2028 is what would happen.
Yeah,
A
interesting.
court would say, "You can do this, but you can't do it for 2026."
And who would be able to bring such a case? A potential candidate?
A candidate could bring the case, a citizen could bring the case, anyone in California could bring a lawsuit to stop them from, overturning the constitutional amendment. If there were grounds for a lawsuit, then anyone in California could bring it. Any citizen in California, I believe, could bring it.
All right. Well, Lucy. Well, hopefully it won't be me needing to do this because they'll sort of change their minds and not go ahead with it. Also, it's such a distraction. That's the other thing. With all these problems that we have. I mean, this week I was in Sacramento, also laying out my plans to improve education in California, which is a total disaster, where we have nearly 60% of third graders can't read properly. I mean, it's a disaster. I mean, that's the foundation of opportunity. I mean, it's whatever, like there's so many issues. The fact that families find it so hard to make ends meet. We've got the highest cost for gas, electricity, water, you name it, housing, rent, worst business climate, small businesses having a nightmare. All these are real issues. And yet the entire conversation is about this redistricting stuff. It's really bad. All right, let's move on. Los Angeles. The unions, they never give up. So the minimum wage, let's start with that.
There's a huge fight going on. Unite Here Local 11 is a powerful union that represents hotel workers and airport concession employees. And they are in a huge fight with everybody to try and get whatever they can get ahead of the Olympics. And so they're doing signature collection for initiatives. Uh, they already lobbied to get a $30 minimum wage. They got the city council to approve this, a $30 minimum wage for hotel and airport workers ahead of the Olympics, which is going to
Wait,
cause
this so
huge
I heard
problems.
the stories about that. So the that's already
It's already the law, but the businesses that would be affected by that qualified a referendum, which means that
to
it
overturn
will
it.
go to the voters to overturn it.
Right.
And since it qualified, they turned in the signatures, and I think they had enough, and that freezes it. Once they turned in the signatures, I think that freezes it, so it can't
Yes.
go into effect. And
So
meanwhile,
when is the referendum going to be?
I think it's the next regular election is the way that would work.
So
So
26
it
actually.
would be 2026. It'd be June, I would imagine, or
Okay.
possibly November. I think it would be June.
Right.
Um, so the union is now collecting signatures for an initiative that would be a $30 minimum wage citywide. Everybody would get a $30 minimum
Oh
wage.
my goodness.
And they also have one that would require voter approval of event centers that are built either on city property or with city assistance. And so this affects 5 venues for the Olympics. They would have to go on the ballot for voter approval before they could be built or substantially remodeled. I think this is so crazy. And the city is saying, well, we can't have this. We have to get ready for the Olympics. We can't hold up all the construction for voter approval of each of the venues. And that's if this measure qualifies. Uh, of course, the Olympics are coming in 2028.
The minimum wage increase, okay, mad. It'll just destroy jobs and whatever. We know all those arguments. I think anyone who listens to this show and watches us will know what those arguments are. I just want to make a quick point, though. Every time we talk about this, I want to add my little point here about what I call the Democrat doom loop, which is they make everything more expensive with their crazy policies. Whether that's the climate policies and labor regulations, all kinds of other regulations, raising the cost of everything. Then they realize, wow, everything's really expensive. It's so expensive to live here now. What are we going to do about it? We're going to raise the minimum wage so people can afford to live here. And it goes on. And of course, you raise the minimum wage, that increases businesses' costs, yet again, making everything more expensive. So it's a doom loop. It just gets worse and worse. Instead of saying, hang on a second, why don't we actually try cutting costs and reducing the things that make everything so expensive, like the ridiculous climate policies and so on. So that's just an aside. I always make that point. But, I understand why unions want higher. That's what they always do. They argue for higher minimum wages. What is it with the venues? What's that about? Why do they want to? Do they want to block them, or what are they?
It
What's the
it
intent
seems
here?
it seems to be some kind of big backroom negotiation that's going on. I'm not really sure what they're going to try to get, but clearly they're doing initiatives. They can withdraw them before they go to the ballots. So there's negotiating leverage. And the business groups in the city have have started collecting signatures for something that would repeal the Los Angeles gross receipts tax, which is a huge source of revenue. It's a tax not on the profits, but on the gross receipts of businesses in the city of Los Angeles. And they want to repeal it entirely. So the city, of course, is up in arms about this because I think it's $900 million a year in revenue. It's almost $1 billion a year that would be gone if the voters approve getting rid of the gross receipts tax. And this actually is under Prop 218 from 1996. They have a lower signature requirement. A lot of people don't know this in California, but the Constitution, Prop 218, gives voters the power to repeal any fee or tax, any local fee or tax. So
Local.
local. And
Right.
and that means that the Los Angeles City business gross receipts tax can be repealed. A sales tax can be repealed. A parcel tax can be repealed, a transfer tax can be repealed, and the signature threshold is 5% of the number of votes cast for all candidates for governor in the last general election for governor. So that is lower than the other signature requirements for initiatives, which I think are 10% of the number of registered voters. This is 5% of the number of actual votes cast for governor, and that's a much lower number. So it can be a very empowering thing, and the business community has unleashed it on the city of Los Angeles. So there's some kind of negotiation going on.
So they've got the signatures to repeat to put it on the ballot. The
Not
repeal
yet.
of the gross.
They're collecting them now, I believe, or they're about to collect them,
Right.
and they only need probably under 50,000 signatures. So not 150,000 signatures,
Yeah.
but less than
So
50,000
how does that
signatures.
connect to the Olympic venues?
I'm not sure how it connects to the Olympic venues, but it's leverage against the city council that they're doing this because the city council obviously and the mayor obviously don't want to lose this business tax, this gross receipts tax. So they're going on offense. They're saying, well, we're going to qualify an initiative. We're going to put this on the ballot. We can do the commercials. We can buy the advertising. We can get this passed, and you will lose all this revenue. Now let's talk. That's what it looks like to me.
From the
I,
business side.
from the business side. And so
Right.
from the union side, you've got this arm twisting over holding the venues hostage on the that's from the union, and then from the business side, we're going to repeal your tax revenue.
Right.
And it looks to me like they're all negotiating, and I'm not sure where this lands. We'll have to watch.
Amazing. Just on the gross receipts, how what is that? How much what's the percentage there? What's that?
I don't know the percentage, and it might vary depending on the revenue. I think it's a tiered tax. I would have to look, but it's on the gross receipts. It's not on the profits. It's on the gross receipts.
Yeah, which is outrageous.
It's very high. It's one of the reasons you see businesses go right across the border in Los Angeles to you see them go to Glendale and Burbank and Calabasas and Long Beach, and they'll go anywhere but Los Angeles because the taxes in Los Angeles are so abusive.
By the way, in terms of the cost of the Olympics, I've seen arguments put out by the Olympic people. I don't know, the LA committee or whoever it is, that it's going to be profitable and there's no public money and it's going to be profitable. Okay. There's my
I'm
answer.
sorry.
You're laughing.
I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny. It's profitable. Here's what's gonna happen. The, state of California is on the hook, I think, for $270 million, but they don't pay a dime till LA exhausts its own $270 million. I think that's the figure, and the LA 28 organization is going to vaporize after the Olympics. So whatever they promised to cover with their advertising revenue and whatever else they're bringing in, whatever they promised to cover, LA can go send them an invoice and say, you promised us reimbursement, and good luck with that. So they're in the middle of negotiating one of the agreements for the enhanced services. The security is going to be very expensive. In the post 9/11 situation, it's much more security than it was in 1984. Even though that was a lot of security, this is going to be more. And the federal government will help. Uh, how much the federal government wants to help Los Angeles is another question, because we've got this situation where the mayor is practically running the South Carolina government in the pre-Civil War era of just total defiance of the federal government, and all these insults going across the country to Washington. So how much the Trump administration wants to help Los Angeles, I don't think they're going to rush to make things easy for Mayor Bass.
Well, they don't want it but they neither does the president want it to be an embarrassment. Of course, we all want it to be a huge success. I want it to be a huge success, but and a showcase for California to the world. That's what we want, and not to cost taxpayers as well. We those, and it should be possible, by the way, to do that, because in the private sector, all the time we're producing things that are world marvels without any kind of government or taxpayer involvement. So this shouldn't be beyond the scope of what Californians can do if we just managed it properly. I know that, they don't want to let it be, because it's an embarrassment not just to California, Los Angeles, but to America.
They won't let it be an embarrassment, but who's going to get the credit for saving the day? That's, I think, the question.
Yeah, it's interesting. But it's just as an interesting aside, I was in DC the other week, and I went to see Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, among other meetings in Washington, and we were just talking about various policy things, high-speed rail, and so on, affecting California. And I said, so I was proactively raising a bunch of things like that, and I said, well, but how do you see California? What are you thinking about when you think of California? What are your priorities? And the first thing he said was the Olympics. In the sense that especially in LA, we know for obvious reasons, getting people around is going to be, especially the venues are so spread out.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Orange
it's going to
County,
be
they're all over
challenging.
the place. It's Southern California, really, not just LA.
Right. It's going to be challenging. Some of it's in Oklahoma City, so there are all kinds of transportation issues involved.
Yes, exactly. All right. Let's just finish up with this story from Santa Cruz about, again, yet another sneaky stealth tax.
We've talked about this upland loophole where the state Supreme Court said that if a tax increase is put on the ballot by a citizen's initiative, then the Constitution doesn't apply. So taxes that need a 2/3 vote, they don't need a 2/3 vote. If a citizen puts it on the ballot with signatures, then by gosh, it can pass with a simple majority. Well, everyone's taking advantage of this. And in Santa Cruz, the mayor is backing an initiative. If it went from the city council, it would need a 2/3 vote, but it's from the mayor's initiative. So simple majority is enough. It's a transfer tax and a parcel tax. A transfer tax is a sales tax on real estate. So you sell your house, you owe a percentage of the sale price to the
And who
government.
pays it, the seller or the buyer?
Well, I guess the seller pays it, but it's in the price, so
Price, yeah.
the buyer winds up with a higher price because of it. So a parcel tax and a transfer tax on homes of a value 1.8 million or more, and
Can
that
you
will
just say
go
that
on
again?
the.
So transfer tax, and what's the first thing?
The other
The
thing is a
parcel.
parcel tax, which
So
is
what's that?
it's another kind of property tax. These are workarounds from Prop 13. Prop 13 prohibits transfer taxes and it prohibits ad valorem taxes, which is a tax on the value, which is how a property tax works. But someone invented the idea of a parcel tax where it's a real estate property tax, just like a property tax, but not calculated by value. So either a flat tax on each parcel, or it's based on square footage, or it's based on something else, but it can't be based on value. So that's a parcel tax. So these are real estate taxes, is what's happening. And they're working around
Is
Prop
it really
13.
as simple as that to evade the intent of Prop 13? That instead of the value, it's just a different metric, but it's still a property tax.
Well, the courts have been upholding all of these things since 1978, and this is the hatchet that's coming for Prop 13.
But what could did you say Prop 13 outlaws transfer tax?
It outlawed transfer taxes. There was a pre-existing documentary transfer tax that was allowed 0.11%. So that's not very much. And that was allowed and that stays, but Prop 13 said nothing else. No new real estate transfer taxes. But in the 1990s, there were a couple of court decisions that said, well, it's okay if it's a charter city that has its own constitution and it has more independence, and it's okay if it's a general tax and not for a special purpose, and we'll allow it. So that's out of the air. It's pulled right out of the air, but there you go. So transfer taxes became legal. A lot of cities adopted them. And in Los Angeles, we have Measure ULA, this so-called mansion tax, which is on all real estate above a certain value. The value is $5 million. Doesn't matter whether it's a mansion or it's an affordable housing complex or it's a mall or an office building or a car dealership. If it's worth more than $5 million, 4% of the sale price goes to the city government.
So that's a
If it's
transfer tax.
That's a transfer tax, and above 10 million it goes to 5.5%. So compared to 0.11%, that's a pretty big tax increase. And this was prohibited by Prop 13. So this Measure ULA tax is really unconstitutional two different ways. It's unconstitutional because it's a transfer tax, it's unconstitutional because it's a citizens initiative that didn't get a two-thirds vote for a special purpose. It needed a two-thirds vote, didn't get it because of this court-created loophole, which the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is trying to close.
Yes. So, and again, to remind everyone, that was what the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act was going to close. That was
Right.
the ballot initiative that you were very involved in, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association plus Business Roundtable, got it qualified, was ready for the ballot last year, and then the Supreme Court, at the governor's request, outrageously removed it from the ballot without the voters having spoken, and you're back for another go next time. That's a good summary?
That is correct. And the Taxpayer Protection Act last year had a lot of different provisions in it, and some of them the Supreme Court said were too much. It went too far for one initiative. It was more like a revision of the Constitution, which can't be done by an initiative. HJTA disputes that interpretation. Nonetheless, it was taken off the ballot. And this new initiative, they have stuck very closely to exactly what the court said in that decision was allowable. So this will not be thrown off the ballot. This is the Local Taxpayer Protection Act to save Prop 13 at saveprop13.com.
And you're gearing up to really campaign on that next year.
The signature collection begins at the end of August. Saveprop13.com.
Well, Saving Prop 13 is right there on the homepage of my website as part of my tax plan. So very much supportive of that. Just so one last point on that, the loopholes, we've talked about this before, forgive me, but just in terms of for those who didn't hear our previous conversations, the loopholes that have enabled these local workarounds to Prop 13, undermining it. Did you say they were court cases from the 90s?
The transfer tax loophole is from the 1990s that said charter cities, some transfer taxes, even though Prop 13 says no transfer taxes, some are okay. That was in the 1990s. The Upland loophole from 2017 is the one that says if a tax increase is put on the ballot by a
Oh, yes,
citizens
50%, not
initiative,
two-thirds.
it
Yeah.
doesn't need the two-thirds vote.
And last
right?
question, why is it called Upland?
The case was California Cannabis Coalition versus City of Upland, and there was this ambiguous language in it about citizen initiative tax increases, and that is what caused the appellate courts to start widening this loophole and
Yes.
cementing it into place. We have to get rid of it.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, does all of it make you think all these initiatives, it's a nightmare? Do we? Because it's all kind of, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because it's used to increase taxes, but it's also a weapon, as we talked about earlier, to reduce them and to
Yes.
restrain government and to do good things like term limits or whatever.
Exactly. Well, that's the important thing is that the initiative was created in 1911 in California by the voters because sometimes the legislature is the problem and the voters have to do things independent of the legislature. And the initiative process allows voters to write laws, put them on the ballot, and pass them. And this is a really important protection. It's direct democracy, it's a protection against abuses from the legislature. But as is the case with politics, special interests, big money, they get involved. They can co opt the process. One of the things we're doing with the Save Prop 13 initiative is creating a less expensive way to qualify an initiative to re empower the voters to do this, to hold the government accountable. And so this is a one-page petition that can be downloaded and printed at home. And everyone in California can do it simultaneously. and it's possible to qualify an initiative at a much lower cost.
Has that never been done before?
We tried it with repeal the death tax to get rid of that
Yes, I
death
remember that.
tax that's
Yeah.
in Prop 19 that changed the rules for taxing inherited property. We tried to do it. We did pretty well. With what we spent and what we collected, it ended up about $1 a signature. So we ended up with between 4 and 500,000 signatures, if I remember right. And and if you scale that up, that can absolutely work. You can educate people on how to do this at home and how to correctly fill it out so it's valid. It's very simple.
And then you
And
have to mail it in.
and you mail it in.
Yeah, it's
And
very interesting. I mean, this is a conversation for another time, but let's make sure we have it on all of this. I remember, years ago, in fact, my first foray into California policy and politics was on the cost of housing, and all the ridiculous labor and environment and the stealth taxes. They call it impact fees, for which have now just escalated totally out of control. Just up to 20% of the cost of a home can end up being hidden taxes. So I had ballot initiative to control that and sort of limit those. Anyway, so I went through this process. The number that I was given for the cost per signature was $10 per signature, and you need over $1 million. So that's like $10 million entry fee just to get something on the ballot. That's a lot of money. If you've got pioneering a way for people to really do that, that does restore what it was supposed to be all about. And I guess we should say that's why, because people may hear this conversation and think, oh, this initiative thing is a nightmare. They keep putting in all these tax increases, which is contributing to the fact that we have the highest taxes in the country. But actually, your focus, which is restoring the protections of Prop 13, actually is the right answer to that. And it's a very American answer, because, of course, in our system, the whole idea of America, the Constitution, everything is about restraining government. That's the whole point. And so using the system to do that is exactly right.
yes.
So we'll definitely make sure we talk about Save Prop 13. But for the moment, people should go to the website, saveprop13.com. Fantastic. Great conversation, Susan. Thank you as always. See you soon.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be with you.
Well, that is our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I always learn so much from our conversations with Susan. I'm sure you do as well. Make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And please support my campaign for governor. We need your help. We need to build a grassroots army. Actually, it would be incredibly helpful if you could help us with this fight on redistricting. Donate what you can to our campaign. You can find us at stevehiltonforgovernor.com. I'm away next week, but normal service will be resumed very soon after that. We'll see you back here for the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show.